Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live program on managing anxiety in anxious times. My name's Moira, and I'll be chatting with Bev Aisbett, who'll be delivering a presentation and a Q&A afterwards. If you have any questions, simply post them in the comments below, and we will pose them to Bev at the end of her presentation. Bev Aisbett is the author and illustrator of 16 self-help titles, which feature her unique cartoon format utilised as a means of simplifying and adding levity to subjects as complex and confronting as anxiety and depression. Her books are published by HarperCollins, as well as several titles with other publishing houses, including Exile Publishing, JoJo Publishing, and Arcturus Publishing. The two main titles in this series are Taming the Black Dog on depression and Living with It on anxiety. Two new titles were released in 2010. I Love Me and Get Over It. Bev's autobiography, All of It, a memoir of love, fear and art, published by HarperCollins in 2014, was nominated for the Stellar Literary Award. Bev has also since produced 30 Days, 30 Ways to Overcome Anxiety and its sequel, 30 Days, 30 Ways to Overcome Depression, as well as a book for parents of anxious children, Worry-Proofing Your Anxious Child. She's currently working on a children's book on anxiety entitled Meeting Little It, which will be self-published later in the year. This year, 2020, in response to the COVID crisis, as well as assisting people with anxiety through life's challenges in general, Bev wrote Cruising Through Calamity, which will be released in January 2021. Bev has also adapted several existing self-help titles by leading authors into her cartoon format, including The Happiness Trap by Dr. Russ Harris, and several titles in the best-selling Alan Carr series. In her 20-year career as an illustrator and cartoonist, Bev's work has appeared in Herald Sun, The Age, The Sunday Age, Bulletin, and many other media, corporate and community publications. As a painter, Bev has exhibited widely over the past 15 years with her work rapidly gaining popularity with people from all walks. She has exhibited at Without Peer Gallery, Smart Arts Gallery, Bendigo Regional Arts Gallery, Tasmanian Shop and Art Gallery, as well as mounting solo shows at various venues. Bev currently lives in Alexandra in country Victoria. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Bev Aisbett. Welcome, Bev. It's lovely to have you
Laura.
This evening.
What a wonderfully presented introduction. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
That sounded very sort of TV announcer. Was spot on. So thank you.
I'll now hand it over to you and I will share your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for having me. This, folks, is my inaugural Zoom presentation, so I might be a little bit rough around the edges with that, but that's okay. I'll do my best, as I'm sure you'll understand. So what we're looking at there is the cover of the new book called Cruising Through Calamity. And just a little bit of a background on how this book came to be. I actually began this book for a whole different reason about 5 years ago, when I found myself going through a pretty hairy, scary crisis on the financial front. And it's amazing how life can turn you on your ear in the blink of an eye, pretty much. It happened very fast, and it was certainly looking down the barrel of a pretty serious experience. And I remember one day I ran into a friend, and I just had some terrible news about my situation, and I felt the floor drop out from under me. I really did have that sense of everything disappearing that I'd known, and feeling very insecure and lost and really not anywhere to turn. And there are some problems with being in the public eye, and that includes it's really difficult to show that you're not really coping too well, because people require you to be on your game. And, that comes with the territory. You're there for others, and it's important that you hold a certain professional stance. But at that time, I was kind of losing it. So, as I tend to do when I'm going through my own challenges, and this is how all my books have come about through lived experience, I took to pen and paper and I started work on a book that had a whole different title than this one. It was called What to Do When You're in Deep Doo-Doo. And the chapters were of a similar sort of nature. So it was kind of fun in some ways, and it was looking at a lighter side of it, but while exploring the emotional context of going through something that's really quite challenging. So little did I know that that book would come into its own in a way that I could never have imagined as we began 2020. Please excuse my voice. I'm just going to have a sip of water. So essentially the introduction of this book says crisis. It can happen to anyone, and then it happened to everyone. And so in a way we are in a time that we couldn't have foreseen. And there are a lot of people experiencing emotions that they might not have felt to such a degree before. We're certainly all facing a situation that's unprecedented. We're sort of making it up as we go along. And we are facing a time when anxiety is certainly going to come to the fore. My argument is that it's not going to create anxiety that wasn't there. It's going to bring to the surface latent anxiety, because there are always going to be those people who find that they can sort of cruise through these situations while others go under. So I structured the book around looking at how some people can maneuver their way through challenges and come out smiling, while others struggle to even manage to get through one day. And this applies not just to the current crisis that we're facing. The book embraces any of the big life changes that come our way that pull the rug out. That might be the end of a marriage, or the loss of a dear one, or sudden financial challenges, illness, any of those sorts of things that seem to come out of the blue. And I think the recurrent theme with these is that we feel like life has actually tripped us up, that life isn't fair and it shouldn't have happened this way. But I'm going to get into that, because the main thing that keeps us struggling or prevailing is the way that we report situations to ourselves. So this book is designed to help people regardless of what the crisis is, because it comes down to the same formula. It's what you're telling yourself that makes it feel a certain way to you. And either you can sink or swim, depending on the skills that you bring to the situation, rather than having to change the situation itself. Because there are some things that really are out of our control. And we need to build that into life, rather than expecting that life will fill our own expectations and go in a smooth line. Certainly has shown us that it's not going to do that. Moira, could I have the next image, please?
Yep, that's up now.
Yep, there we go. So look, we've got two people here. The person on the left is responding in a way that ideally most of us would benefit from, whereas the other person is responding in a way that is calamitous in itself. And really the same thing is happening to both these people. So it's not the situation, it is the way we respond. I'm getting a bit of an echo, guys. It's gone now? Okay.
Carry on.
Further down that page. Yep, thanks. So again, we've got this man with a more philosophical approach, and the person on the right has actually built for themselves a monument to their problem. In that kind of dramatic, all-embracing thinking, you've got someone who's created for themselves something that won't be easy to get over, because they've actually, in their mind, thought of it in such finite terms, that this is something that has changed my life forever. I'm never going to get past it. I'm never going to get over it. Again, it's not the situation. It's the opinion that we have of it. So I'm looking at the press throughout this and people's responses to COVID. And to be honest, I'm seeing a hell of a lot of whinging going on. And I'm not underestimating the impact of this or undermining people's response, but I am seeing people lock themselves into an attitude that keeps the misery going. And I think if I can achieve anything tonight, is that you start thinking about what you're telling yourself about how this is for you, how it might be for you, how it's going to turn out for you, and to see whether that's actually supporting you or causing you to feel even greater anxiety. And that's the whole point of this exercise. I'll go to the next one. Thanks, Maura.
There you go.
Thanks. Okay, so there are certain things that anxious people do that keep them anxious. And here are a few examples. They think in extremes. Everything's black or white. It's all or nothing. It's now or never. It's everyone or no one. It's totally and completely and utterly. And if you think about that terminology, it's certainly not going to calm you down. And I think what we need to do is have a look at that kind of self-talk and challenge it. How do you know that everyone thinks that way? Have you gone around and done a survey and asked each person what they think? Most of these statements are generalizations. They can't be proven. They're very finite. There's no room to move with them, and there's no grey areas. So that's one thing that an anxious person might be able to look at right from the start. Is my thinking very dramatic? How might I sort of be a bit more moderate in my responses? Okay, the next one down is that they have very fierce inner critics. And the thing that's really a problem with anxiety is the person's relationship with themselves. Often you're at war with yourself. You're talking in very critical and harsh terms to yourself. So that's not going to help you feel great. You do need to be standing by you to get through this situation, and we'll have a look at that a little bit further too. Oh gosh, I'm a bit worried about this voice, Maura.
Have you got plenty of water there, Bev?
I have.
That's good.
Okay. The next down is very high expectations. People with anxiety do tend to push themselves beyond reasonable limits. And behind this is a real fear of making a mistake. So you might ask what's really running that. And again, that's the inner critic, the one that's telling you that you might blow it or you can't blow it, or that you're an idiot or you're a loser or any of that sort of thing. What is the purpose of that inner voice? That inner voice is actually not so much the bad guy as the guy or girl who's trying to help you avoid making mistakes, because your very survival relies on you being on top of things. So that's why we've got that hypervigilance going on. And that's part of the pattern of anxious thinking. The next one down is one that really is quite chronic with anxiety as well, which is this overinvestment in other people's opinions. A huge amount of anxiety would be gone if there was just you and all of your physical needs were taken care of. Maybe have a few pets around you or a favourite person. But if we remove this sense of worrying about being scrutinised, then we lose a lot of anxiety. So what's going on there? I think really what the ailment in this is that we put our well-being and our sense of self in the hands of other people, and then we're let down when they're not as interested in maintaining it as we would like them to. So that's another factor that really needs to be examined. Next one down, please, Maura. Did I miss one?
No, this is the next one.
Okay, thank you. Here we see a response with anxiety where people tend to go straight into turmoil. It's sort of a go-to when there's a challenge that they're not quite up to. And they're easily overwhelmed by this. And I want you to notice through all of these messages how very childlike they are. A big part of anxiety is that the person reverts to a child's response to the world, where this overinvestment in other people's opinions that we just looked at is very much about making other people into your guide or your guardian or your parent or your advisor or your counsellor, or seeing others as superior to you in some ways. In this case, we've got a woman who sort of goes, I don't know what to do, goes into that sort of childlike response to the world, which is reflecting the fact that she doesn't really have a strong conviction in her own ability to manage. And this is something she's probably learned. She's probably been taught this inability to cope by someone else maybe doing it for her or treating her in such a way. And a big part of moving out of anxiety is fronting the challenge, stepping up and stepping fully into your own adult, and recognising without judgment when the child's in play, because the child is in play with anxiety most of the time. If you think about anxious thinking, it's got that sort of childlike aspect to it. I know they're all going to hate me. I know I'm going to mess it up. I'll never be any good. It's all going to be horrible. I don't know what to do, and so on. If you hear that childlike voice in yourself, then you know that you've stepped out of your ability to be able to step up and take on the challenge, which is what you need to learn to do. Because all that's happening is that your centre is not strong enough and fortified enough to be able to deal with the things that are coming your way. And it's not a matter of that happening to you, it's a matter of you allowing that to happen and developing the skills that you're much more resilient in the face of challenges than you actually thought you could be. And you can do it. You can do it. Just got to kind of step up a little into that adult self when you feel yourself sort of going off centre. Similarly is the next point, aside from the childlike issue, is that they don't trust themselves. Here we have the unhelpful thinking style, and you cannot have anxiety without an unhelpful thinking style. It just doesn't work. I cannot go from a neutral emotional state, such as I'm in now, to angry, for example, without thinking about something that causes me to feel angry. I just can't go from that emotional place without the intervening thought that takes me there. And it's exactly the same thing with anxiety. You can't go from peaceful to anxious without thinking about something that causes you to feel anxious. People have this perception especially in the early stages of anxiety, that it just happens. It just happens to them. They're walking down the street and there was nothing going on, and then suddenly they're anxious. Well, that just doesn't happen either. In the background is usually a simmering sort of anxiety that hasn't been addressed. There's an anxious response to life. There's a perfectionism. There's a pushing yourself, the things that we're looking at here. And then one day it all gets a bit much. There's a triggering event, or there's been a build-up which tips the balance, and you find yourself having your first panic attack or feeling particularly anxious and not able to deal with it. So whether that's a subtle response or not, excuse me, you might argue that you feel anxiety first, and then the anxiety becomes anxiety about the anxiety. But essentially it's the same thing. Even if your metabolism is out, even if something's happening to you physically to imitate the symptoms of anxiety, that's going to remain a physical thing unless you start telling yourself some sort of horror story about what's happening. And so you have the physical symptoms, which we'll look at shortly. And then you've got the story that you tell yourself about the symptoms. And usually that story is of that extreme nature. That, you know, there must be something terribly wrong that I can't cope with, that, you know, my world's fallen apart, I can't handle this, and so on. And so we get this escalating problem, which really starts with a bunch of symptoms that could remain on a physical level, and then they would pass quite quickly. We've had people who, I'm going to have another sip of water.
Yeah, that's
sorry,
right. That's all right. Have a bit of a rest, Bev. That's okay.
Oh, I'm trying to push through it, but it's a little bit tricky. Anyway.
Yeah, we'll have question time later, and you can have a little bit of a break. I can ask you some questions.
I so want to do this, though, so I'll just push through it.
Going well.
Thank you. You'll have people who find themselves in a frightening situation, and the natural response is to feel anxiety. It is a natural response to something that suggests that we're under threat or our survival is challenged in some way. So in no way am I saying that people responding anxiously in this current climate is the wrong thing. It is a natural response when our survival is under threat. You'll get some more clarity on that in a moment. But there are people who, say you're on a near miss in a car accident, very normal to feel anxious about that. But you can either carry on that anxiety and start looking for parallel situations in your life, and it becomes an issue, it becomes post-traumatic, or you walk away from it and put it down to the experience that you're going through at the time. And again, the only thing that causes those two situations is the way that the person deals with it in their thoughts, in the way that they're reporting it to themselves and the way they're interpreting the situation. So if we go back, you don't need to, Moira, but if we go back a couple of images to the woman saying, you know, I'll never get over this, then essentially she has sentenced herself to that outcome when she didn't really need to. So have a really good think about what you're thinking, because that's the thing that keeps you constantly upset or not. Okay, another thing on this next point is the nature of anxious thinking is that it's very future-based. And so we have the mantra for anxiety, which is what if? What if it, you know, doesn't work? What if I can't cope? What if I make a fool of myself? What if we're condemned forever to be stuck in this situation? what if this virus never goes away? What if all these people die? What if, we all go broke? The whole horror scenario that people are going through in their minds at the moment. And the only use for the what if question is if you answer the damn thing. So what if it all goes to hell and back? Then it goes to hell and back. If you're asking, for example, what if I'm on a crashing plane? Well, you'll do whatever you're going to do on a crashing plane. You don't know what you'll do on a crashing plane until you're on a crashing plane. The only other way that you might benefit from the what if question and answering it is that you actually come up with a plan. Then it's useful. But asking what if is rehearsing for a life you may not end up living or an experience you may not end up having and causing yourself a lot of agony on the way. The important thing is to look at right now. So, we've got all this going on in the world, and yes, it's not fun and it's not great, but right at this very moment, if you're sitting here listening to me, and thank you for doing that, you're probably sitting in a nice warm house with a roof over your head. You've probably had some dinner. Nobody's dying in your household. There are no bombs raining down on you. Right at this moment, you're okay. And that's where you need to stay. Doesn't matter what comes next. You'll find out. So rehearsing for disaster is a huge part of the anxious outlook and a very unnecessary one, because, on a level you're sort of saying to yourself, if I worry about this enough, then I'll be prepared. But actually all you're doing is causing yourself a lot of unnecessary unrest in the present when you could be actually having quite a good time. So it's this future-based thinking that is really quite unhelpful. The next one down. Thanks, Maura. Is perfectionism. And again, that's the inner critic keeping an eye out to make sure you don't muck up the next time. So you better do it right this time, just to make sure that you don't get caught out making a mistake. A lot of this, again, is very influenced on fearing being judged, fearing being criticised, and we may have learned that in childhood as well. Perfectionism is very much tied to anxiety. So it's really only one way to deal with that is to recognise that life is actually pretty messy, as we're all finding out, and that to just sort of make a few mistakes here and there deliberately or let something go. And, I've often likened the process of recovery from anxiety as someone's white-knuckling, they're gripping on to something, and I'm coming along and saying, let go of this, let go of that, let go of this, let go of that, until you're actually free-falling. And discovering that if you just let go, things have their own way of working out. It's the hanging on and it's the resistance that causes the greatest suffering. And, I mentioned before that I'm looking at people's reactions at the moment, and, they're talking about what they're missing, what they wish things were like, what has been lost to them. Humans do this. They go over and over things and then wonder why they feel so bad. It's not about being uncaring about your situation, but it is about accepting your situation, accepting that life has always been unpredictable. You could never guarantee the future, and that we're in this situation, and that's just how it is. instead of lamenting and ruminating and wishing it was otherwise and criticising and blaming, and which we're seeing a lot of in our state at the moment, to sort of sit back and say, well, this is the situation I'm dealing with. So how do I deal with it? Rather than fighting against it and again reporting to oneself how bad it is. Okay. The next thing is we've got someone who's very high achiever, and that's all right. That's all right.
I jumped ahead.
Yeah, well, see, I was talking about being quite happy to make a boo-boo here and there. It's fine. Yeah, this constant push. I did a little post on Facebook just day before yesterday, I think it was, about one of the positives to come out of lockdown is that we have the opportunity to maybe step out of the rat race that was constantly on overdrive and this rush to get things done and all these deadlines and, I have to be here and I have to be doing that. And, some of us have the opportunity to step back from that, not everyone, and to really make the most of that, really have a big think about what you're going to put your energy into and what is worth your effort at this time. And really, who is cracking the whip here? Often we sort of don't even consider that we are the ones who are forcing ourselves on and on and on, beyond what's reasonable and what's kind to ourselves. So you're the one cracking the whip most of the time. It's an artificial idea to think there is some authority beyond yourself that can actually make you do what you don't want to do. You get to say no. And the no word is one that is seriously lacking in the anxious vocabulary. I will actually say a little bit more about that one, because this great investment in other people's opinion is that we have a tendency not to say no and go along with something and then resent it, or feel that we're being imposed upon, or someone has taken advantage of us, or ripped us off or done us harm, when we really weren't serving ourselves well enough to say, I'm not happy about doing this, to actually step up and make your own choice around it. Again, it's that childlike thing, because a grown-up would sort of say, no offence, but I'd really prefer not to do this, or not go there, or not say that, or whatever it is that you feel you're being forced into. So maybe use that word no a little bit more often. Okay, so on this page, we've got the classic anxiety symptoms, and it all looks very dramatic and it all looks very terrifying. And I've been through panic attacks, and I know it's like being on a crashing plane. It is pretty full-on experience, and you don't want to be repeating that too often. But essentially, all that's happening is that you are responding in a very normal way to a threat, a perceived threat. So if we look at the symptoms, you pretty well know what they are. If you've had anxiety, it can be any or all of these, or a combination of these, and it tells you that you have anxiety. That's how you know you have these symptoms. In the same way that if I have a really severe headache, I know I've got a migraine. So that's all it's telling you. It doesn't tell you that your world is ending. It doesn't tell you that your life will never be the same. It doesn't tell you that everybody hates you. It doesn't tell you that you'll never be loved again. Those are the things that you add to this set of symptoms that makes a story about the anxiety that keeps the anxiety going. Symptoms in themselves can remain contained to the first time you felt them. If you don't add World War III in your own thinking about them, but we do, because it's a very scary experience to feel that overwhelmed. So why do we feel that overwhelmed? Go to the next one, please, Moira. Well, this is why they're happening. You've had an idea that you're under threat. And so your body and mind, being the genius systems that they are, respond to the threat to keep you safe. They're there to ensure your survival. And this goes back, way back to when you were running away from a dinosaur and you had to keep going, or you had to stand and fight to ensure your survival. So we're not really that evolved when it comes to things that stress us. We still have the same physiological response. So the rapid heartbeat and the rapid breathing, these are to ensure that you have enough oxygen and blood pumping through you so you can get out of there if you need to, or fight if you need to. Let's go to the next one. Blood flow increases for a similar reason. That you may have that energy in the muscles as you need them, and they may alternate between looking very pale as the blood goes down to your legs or your extremities, or looking very flushed. Next one. Dilated pupils simply serve to make sure that you can see more, so you can see what's coming towards you and take in more information. Trembling, the muscles are tense because they're ready to run or to fight, so you get a bit trembling as a result. Next one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's it. So they're the symptoms. Actually, Moira, I'll get you to go down to the next image of the symptoms where it's repeated.
Oh, yep, this one.
Yep. No, next. That's it. All right, so we've got this set of symptoms again, but what's the only thing that's causing them? The word on the right, fear. These symptoms will not appear unless you have a thought that there is something to fear. So it's not the symptoms that we need to address. We need to address the fear. And our first response when we challenge, let's go back up again. Thanks, Moira. Go back again. Back. And okay, all right. Our first response is the fearful thoughts. And we need to learn to modify that so we're not jumping immediately to a worst case scenario. Okay, so what we've got here is, I think, a very simple way of getting your head around how to move from being overwhelmed by a problem to a solution. So we've got this guy here and he's looking at the problem, and you can see that in doing so, his back is turned to the solution. All he needs to do is turn around and face the other way and start heading towards.
I thought maybe. Sorry.
Hang on. Go back. All he needs to do is turn around and head towards the solution for the problem to be left behind. You'd think that, wouldn't you? But with anxiety, and most people, not just anxious people, let's go to the next one now. You start fixating on how bad the problem feels. So it's not the problem itself that's the issue. You're telling yourself, I got that echo again, guys. You're telling yourself over and over how awful this feels, and reinforcing the anxiety that you have about having this problem in the first place. So, the more you tell yourself how bad it is, that you're stuck with this, that you can't get past it, you can't bear it, that you're talking about your anxiety in this way, or your depression, or whatever your emotional response is, you end up inflating that. And let's go to the next one, Maura. So you started off with a problem, now you got another one. The problem itself is now compounded because you've added anxiety into the mix. The problem could be solved without the unnecessary burden of adding the anxiety about the problem. The anxiety about the problem, the depression about the problem, including our current situation, are unnecessary burdens that you've added. You know, we've got a situation, it's difficult enough as it is without you getting anxious or depressed about it, because then you've got that problem to deal with as well. Do you hear what I'm saying? So it's a matter of keeping it simple and dealing with what's in front of you without all the anticipation or all the looking back that goes with depression, as an example. If the mantra for anxiety is what if, the mantra for depression is if only. You know, if only this hadn't happened, and it shouldn't have happened to me, and if only my husband hadn't left, and if only I hadn't taken that job, and if only I was prettier or nicer or more popular or whatever. You know, we can go on forever about this. The fact remains that the situation is as it is, and all the if onlys in the world is not going to change that, and all the what ifs in the world are not going to prepare you for what's coming. For whatever's coming is going to come. So
Can I just ask, I think, how do we go about turning that around? I know that we've only got, we need to have some time for questions, and I'm just conscious of your voice and giving it a bit of a rest. But I think on slide 25, ways of seeing big change. Can we have a look at that? And
sure.
Then we'll have time for questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'll go through to if you could just guide me to, I think, which slide were we up to? Working through a problem, things that you can't control and can control.
Oh, yeah. Keep going.
Oh, so we're at the end. We're towards the end here. I think that was the last one. So,
well, actually, we're on herding cats. You know, people will argue that changing their thinking is hard. I get that one all the time. Well, or you know, I can't stop my thoughts. But you know, you really need to have an understanding that no one's doing your thinking for you. There's only you who is doing the thinking. So it's a matter of getting mastery over your self-talk. And at first it's going to feel like herding cats. Your thoughts are all over the place. But essentially that's because you've let them go all over the place. You're not used to that sort of mental discipline. So learning to really rein in your thoughts and getting them much more calm and self-supporting and self-loving is the key to doing this. But, it's a skill, and it's not something that happens quickly because you've been doing it the other way for years and years without really being conscious of it. So the first thing is to be conscious of what you are telling yourself and to change your mind about what the message is going to be. Okay, it says, hello, it's all gone quiet.
Oh, sorry, Bev. I just think after that, if we would like to go to
well, what I will say about the book, it does deal with specific a few specific COVID issues. And I think the one that's been most challenging for people is that we've never been thrown upon ourselves as much as we have now. And I think what that highlights is the relationship with yourself. Because if there's any sort of unrest with yourself, it's really going to come to the surface. You're going to feel lonely, you're going to feel unappreciated, you're going to feel like you don't belong, things are going to feel out of reach. You're not going to be able to structure your day to where you actually work through it quite easily. And it comes down to reassessing the way that you get on with you and to become much more a comrade to yourself and an ally than you have been before.
Well, that's really great advice. So I've got a few questions that are piling in now through our Facebook page. So
Yeah.
Would you like to answer a few of those now, Bev?
Yeah, only the good ones.
Okay. Okay. So Barbara has asked, what if a colleague is giving you negative comments about what you're doing, thus compounding your anxiety?
Well, how are they compounding it, Barbara? I mean, how is a comment going to make you more anxious unless you decide to be more anxious in response? Like, I can either buy into what someone is giving me or I can make a choice not to. So it does come back to how we, again, report that to ourselves. Like, certainly, people can make a comment, it can really stick and it can kind of mess up your day for a while. But it's important to sort of see it in a context. If you're copying criticism, then have a think about what message might you be giving that person that says it's okay to criticise me. Yeah. So the more we can take it upon ourselves, the more we have an opportunity to redirect it and change it. That's a big subject, though.
It's a very big subject.
Yeah.
Do you also see a problem with people not just getting anxious about the lockdown or going into lockdown, into that situation, but actually coming back out of the lockdown and going back into a COVID normal, such as returning to work and returning to school and getting anxious about that? Do you see there could be a problem with that for a lot of people?
Well, again, it's all about how you think about it, isn't it? I mean, we haven't got there yet.
Yes.
And so it's so important to stay in the present, in the now, and deal with what you're dealing with no more than a day ahead. Because I don't think we're emotionally wired to be able to manage more than one day at a time. So, that includes retrospectively as well, like dragging up your whole history is not good for you. Deal with one day at a time and you'll get there when you get there. And it will. I love the old Doris Day thing, que sera. What will be, will be.
Yes, one of my favourites.
Yeah, so let it be.
How can you help a friend who's struggling with anxiety and need professional help without being condescending towards them?
Give them my books.
Well, I have to say, I will let people know about a few of those at the end.
No, I mean, that sounded flippant and it probably was a bit, but, the book is a great way just sort of quietly saying to the person, I recognise you're struggling. I've found these books really helpful, or any other resource, not just mine, but preferably mine. So.
Here's another one. Is it possible in a weird way to be addicted to unhappiness where the negative self-talk is so ingrained that it's almost comforting?
Yes, feeling bad can become a habit, and that's something to be very conscious of. It can be the go-to, and when it's simply because we're not used to it. We're used to feeling wrong, and so feeling worthy and good about yourself and optimistic and alive can feel really foreign, but you will get used to it if you do it often enough. It's another skill.
what degree do you think Western culture has influenced our anxieties by not truly accepting that everything changes constantly?
Yeah, I think, we're not used to change. I think there are a couple of things that makes our current experience very challenging in our modern life. I think we've become very used to having what we want when we want it and not going without. I also think we're not very good at being uncomfortable in any way, shape or form. And the other thing is that there is almost a feeling of entitlement that, bad things should not happen in my life, or challenging things or hard things, and that life is unfair if this happens to me. Well, life's neither fair nor unfair. It's just trucking along, and sometimes we find ourselves in the way of it rather than life serving up something to you. You just sort of happen to be there. I think, why is this happening to all of us at this time? People will often ask that question, why is this happening? Well, it's happening because we're on the planet. We've all elected to be on the planet at this time in history, and that's the only reason it's happening to you. It's not about being doled out something that's fair or unfair. I think my poor dog wants to go out.
Oh, well, we're nearly at the end now, but I've got a question for you, and your voice is really travelling well, which is great. How do you get better at recognising negative self-talk? Often we end up struggling with a feeling without realising how our own thinking actually created it.
Yeah, I think awareness is everything. That's your starting point. Hopefully a bit of awareness from the talk tonight. Instead of just, that herding cats thing, as I said, our thoughts have been just very undisciplined and messy and really self-damaging in so many ways. It's nothing that's happening to you. It's coming from you. And to embrace that is very brave. But it is the first part of taking back the responsibility for where you find yourself emotionally as well as where you find yourself in life. Once you do that without self-blame, you can start making the changes instead of relying on everything out there to change. You recognise that it comes back to me and that I can, I'm the one who needs to make some choices here about how I proceed.
Is anxiety harder to address if a person has a chronic history of unaddressed anxiety?
I'm sorry, Maura, you're dropping in and out a bit there.
Is anxiety harder to address if they've had a chronic history of unaddressed anxiety?
You know what? Someone is not going to change, no matter what you do, until they're ready to change.
Mm.
So, that can happen at any point in the person's journey. When they're ready, they'll turn it around. If they're not, they won't.
Sorry.
And that readiness, can be from someone finally getting fed up with feeling so bad, or that they've, reached a crossroads where it's gone too far for them to be able to live with it as it is.
And live a normal life. Yeah, be able to live life without every day and wanting to make that change.
Or they meet someone and they go, wow, I want what they're having.
And being around positive people as well.
Yeah.
What is the best way to respond to somebody who's dealing with serious anxiety? Should their thoughts be challenged or sympathised with?
Yeah, I don't like sympathy. There's a quote from quite a significant and challenging self-help teacher from the 70s, Werner Erhard. Some people might have heard of Landmark Forum, which is still going on. And he said, giving sympathy to the self-pitying is like giving alcohol to an alcoholic. And as tough as that sounds, there is some truth in that, because, And I often think, why are people reaching out to my Facebook page, which I love it that they do, but what are they looking for? They're looking for reassurance, and we're often looking for sympathy or someone to understand us. And okay, great, but you're going to keep coming back for more and not provide it for yourself if you keep getting it when you're reaching out for it. And I think that the heart of well-being and recovery is that you're doing it for yourself, that you're loving yourself enough to be able to turn to yourself in times of crisis and challenge and find some comfort there. Find that you yourself are enough and that you are your best friend and your supporter and your ally in these tough times. And that's probably the key message here.
Along with that, is there evidence to suggest activities such as mindfulness and meditation can prevent anxious thoughts before they arise, or is it just beneficial as a relaxation technique? Because I know in a lot of your books you have a lot of techniques that you, such as breathing techniques and other things like that you've suggested for people who have panic attacks and anxiety. So is that's definitely a helpful thing to adapt?
I think meditation is the benefits of meditation on a regular basis are beyond measure. It just helps to get you in the right zone to be able to work through your day in a much more peaceful way. I think it's also really good to spend time with yourself in that quiet way, without always doing and rushing. Mindfulness is just a way of bringing you back to the moment, as we were talking about staying in the present. And if you're going into that chaos, you're going out of the present moment and out of yourself. It's a way of bringing you back to ground you, which I think is also important for people with anxiety. People with anxiety spend a lot of their time in the upper chakras, and their energy's all up here. And anything that grounds you is really helpful. Going for a big stompy walk, really just feeling the earth under your feet, pulling yourself, anchoring down into your earthiness is a really helpful way of getting out of that anxious loop. So it's just all energy. It's just energy. It doesn't mean anything. It's just, can run off the rails if you just let it go off the rails. So it's all about bringing things back into something that's contained instead of something that you're just being dragged willy-nilly with.
Yeah, well, I think that's a lovely place to end that. And I just wanted to say, on behalf of everybody who has gotten a lot out of your books, thank you. And I've got a few here. They're fantastic books. And the main thing I think that myself and a lot of people who are readers of your books get a lot out of the fact that it isn't a heavy read. When you're feeling like that, it's something that is actually perhaps maybe even a light bulb moment. It helps you understand what you're going through without having to read a heavy text because of your illustrations. It does make it seem a little bit lighter and easier to absorb and think about as well. And I think it's fantastic. And we're looking forward to your book coming out in January, your book Meeting Little It as well, coming out hopefully sooner than that.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being with us, Bev, tonight. And I know that your voice was a little bit hard to talk sometimes, but it's been great, and thank you very much for that. And I hope everybody enjoyed the program tonight.
Thanks, everyone, and thank you, Maura. Thanks for having me on board, and Courtney for tech support there. So, thank you.
Great background.
Yeah. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.